Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie X-Men Origins, Wolverine, released on May 1, 2009, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. The screen fades into a dusky twilight, where the silhouette of rugged landscapes hints at the grittiness to come. From the very first moment, a hushed tension lingers beneath the roar of distant battlefields, inviting us to step into a world where heroism and anguish collide. A singular figure, fierce yet vulnerable, emerges against a backdrop of smoke and sorrow. His eyes carry the weight of countless memories, each scar a testament to battles fought long before this story begins. This introduction sweeps us into a realm that teems with both raw violence and tender regret. In this cinematic tapestry, we follow a man driven by an unrelenting hunger to uncover his fragmented past. Against the sweeping canvas of both war-ravaged fields and clandestine laboratories, his path is shaped by moments of blistering violence and fleeting tenderness. As a child, he knew the warmth of a loving home, but that innocence was cruelly shattered by the horrors of battle. The narrative drifts like smoke through time, guiding us from the trenches of Vietnam to the secret cloisters where enigmatic forces conspire to control him. Along the way, each memory flickers and fades, leaving only questions that demand answers. There is an almost poetic melancholy in how the story unfolds. Early on, we witness the bond between two brothers, born of blood but torn by circumstance. One craves honor and acceptance, the other yearns only to survive. Their shared laughter around flickering campfires, and the silent promises exchanged beneath a canopy of stars, speak of hopes that seem destined to crumble. When the world descends into chaos, loyalties are tested and the very notion of family is reshaped. In the tender moments when broken souls find solace in each other's company, we feel the fragility of everything they once held dear. As we traverse these winding roads, the main character's mutating abilities begin to surface with visceral intensity. Jagged bone claws, once sheathed, erupt from his knuckles amid bloody skirmishes, a visceral reminder that his evolution is anything but serene. Each flicker of bone and flesh reveals the terrifying power locked within a man who seeks only to protect those he holds dear. When a sniper's bullet sails through twilight air, the primal reflex to rip through iron and flesh transcends human limits. It is a moment that fuses beauty and horror, a dance of survival that leaves both soldier and spectator breathless. The plot surges forward like a freight train barreling through shadowy tunnels. Memories bleed into the present, and what was once solid ground becomes unreliable. An organization steeped in secrecy beckons, promising answers in exchange for loyalty. Within its sterile halls, men and women clad in white coats manipulate genetics as if they were mere toys, their motives obscured by cold detachment. They see him as a weapon waiting to be unleashed, a walking arsenal whose rage can be molded for their own ends. Yet for every experiment they conduct, they ignite a fire that threatens to burn them all. Key elements swirl through the story like ghosts of the past. There are allies whose faces blur with shifting alliances, their true intentions as inscrutable as the night sky. Among them stands a man whose own past is as scarred as a battlefield trench, a former comrade whose conscience has been shattered by bloodshed. His presence is at once comforting and unsettling, a mirror reflecting choices made and regrets carried. Together, they march toward an uncertain future, bound by a shared desire to unravel the truth behind the web of deception that ensnares them. Throughout this odyssey, echoes of loss reverberate against the walls of steel and stone. A childhood friend, once a beacon of innocence, transforms into something unrecognizable, an agent of vengeance whose heart beats with icy resolve. The collision between past affection and present rage delivers a gut punch that reverberates long after the screams fade. Each encounter with this figure is a dance with fate, where every move teeters on the brink of salvation or oblivion. The emotional stakes rise like a wave, cresting until it breaks in a torrent of wrath and despair. The action crescendos in environments that pulse with unspoken danger, the dense foliage of foreign jungles, the antiseptic corridors of clandestine bases, and the desolate plains that seem to mourn fallen heroes. You can almost taste the humidity, feel the chill of sterile hallways, and sense the weight of silent gazes. When a furious meltdown of claws and steel erupts, the roar of animated violence is tempered by the silent question on the protagonist's lips. What price is too high when all you seek is the truth? It is a tension that lingers long after the blades retract and the ground settles. At the heart of this saga lies a mystery that unfurls like a coiled serpent, dangerous, hypnotic, and impossible to ignore. Bits of a fragmented life flicker before our eyes. A laughing child under a carefree sun, the pulse-pounding terror of wartime ambushes, and the sterile precision of experimental chambers. These flashbacks arrive without warning, shattering any illusions of stability and thrusting us into the raw core of memory. Each recollection hints at a truth that, when finally revealed, will upend everything we thought we understood. Subtle hints are scattered throughout, like grains of sand waiting to be shaped by the relentless tides of fate. A soldier's whispered confession under a crimson sky. The flickering of a symbol, a weapon fashioned from bone, etched into the mind of a weary veteran. A woman's tear-streaked face, her voice a tremor in the night as she pleads for forgiveness she cannot offer. These moments, brief as they are, plant seeds of doubt and expectation in our minds, compelling us to piece together the puzzle before it collapses into ruin. We sense the arrival of an unavoidable storm as the protagonist inches closer to the truth. Shadows lengthen across the faces of once trusted comrades, and whispers of manipulation twist the air like poisoned wind. A chilling revelation awaits, one that will sunder the fragile alliance holding this band of brothers together. When the moment finally comes, it strikes with the force of a thunderclap, ripping away hope and exposing the raw nerve of betrayal. The emotional impact is as shattering as the physical blows that echo across a ruined battlefield. There is a moment etched deep in memory where innocence and tragedy collide under the canopy of endless sky. The protagonist, a young boy with laughter as bright as sunlight, runs barefoot through fields of wildflowers, his mother's voice a gentle melody guiding him home. These fleeting seconds of purity stand in stark contrast to the carnage that awaits. When war's storm descends, that same boy is forged into something unrecognizable, an instrument of destruction whose humanity is obscured beneath layers of steel and bone. In those battle-torn forests, the taste of gunpowder hangs heavily in the air, and the cries of comrades lost echo like mournful ghosts. Each skirmish carves deeper lines into his psyche, transforming him into a weapon fueled not by ideology but by survival. It is within the chaos of conflict that he learns to harness his unique abilities. Yet even in these darkest chambers, a stubborn spark refuses to be snuffed out. A woman with haunted eyes slips him a token of hope, a photo, a whisper of a life he barely recalls. She speaks of choices, of the power to choose one's destiny even when the path is shrouded in lies. Her presence is a fragile beacon, guiding him through the labyrinth of deception that threatens to consume him. Through secret glances and hurried notes, she becomes a silent ally, reminding him that beneath the monster lurks a man who still remembers how to feel. As the layers of conspiracy peel away, the bonds of brotherhood are tested in ways none could foresee. The man who once laughed beside him becomes his greatest adversary, twisted by a thirst for vengeance that eclipses reason. When they finally stand face to face, the air crackles with more than just kinetic energy. It hums with the weight of shared history, of promises broken and loyalties betrayed. In their clash, steel meets bone in a dance that is both remorseless and tragic, each strike echoing the choices that led them here. Moments before this cataclysmic confrontation, a confession hangs in the air like a guillotine's blade. The truth, when it is finally unleashed, lands with shattering force, a revelation that turns kin into adversaries and renders every memory suspect. In that crushing instant, the foundations of trust disintegrate, leaving behind a chasm filled with anger and sorrow. The world tilts on its axis as the protagonist realizes that the enemy he has hunted for so long was always connected to him by blood and betrayal. But it is within this crucible of pain that a transformation unfolds. When the final echoes of conflict fade, and the dust settles over a battlefield strewn with the remnants of camaraderie, a new resolve takes root. He stands amidst a quiet aftermath, the hushed whispers of ghosts still swirling on the breeze. In that silence, he hears a faint but unwavering voice, his own, urging him to forge a path beyond vengeance. Slowly, he extends his claws toward the sky, not as tools of destruction, but as symbols of rebirth and resilience. As the dust settles, we glimpse the distorted reflection of a man forever changed. His journey has been a pilgrimage through pain, a search for identity amidst a haze of falsehoods. Now, standing alone among the ruins of shattered alliances, he stares into the future with eyes that have witnessed both heaven and hell. The closing moments do not tie every thread neatly, honoring instead the complexity of life where endings are seldom clear-cut. Instead, they leave us with a sense of hard-won hope, a fragile ember glowing in defiance of despair. In teasing these elements, we invite you to experience the thrill of discovery, the sting of betrayal, and the quiet power of resilience. The story weaves together visceral action sequences and intimate character moments, forging a path that is as thrilling as it is poignant. It is a tale where the line between predator and protector blurs, and where the greatest battles rage within the human heart. By the time the final frame fades, you'll be left pondering the nature of identity, the cost of vengeance, and the enduring strength found in unlikely places. So as the final scene lingers in your mind and the echoes of bone-shattering confrontations fade into memory, remember the journey you've taken through love and loss, through violence and redemption. Let this odyssey remind you that even when the world seeks to break you, the truth within can set you free. And though darkness may loom on every horizon, there is always a light flickering somewhere, in a bond of brotherhood, in the memory of a lost friend, or in the glimmer of hope that refuses to die. The journey's echo never fades. He was born into a world tinged with sorrow before he could even walk. The hum of cicadas drifted through the open fields as his mother cradled him, whispering lullabies that mingled with the distant rumble of trains. His father, a stoic man with calloused hands, would lift him gently toward the sky, teaching him that even the smallest child could hold boundless hope. For a moment, the world felt infinite. Sun-dappled afternoons stretched before them, and laughter echoed across rolling meadows. Yet, this fragile peace would shatter with the first truth of violence. A distant echo of gunfire had found them before he could comprehend its meaning, and in that moment the threads of innocence unraveled. His mother's cries pierced the air as a cavalry of shadows descended upon their homestead. He was shoved into his father's arms, a blur of panic and blood, and the memory of his mother's final, anguished gaze would haunt him long after the smoke cleared. When his father finally carried him through the smoke and ash, the world he returned to had changed. The house stood in ruin, and the father who had once embodied strength seemed hollowed out, a portrait of grief in human form. There were no more lullabies, no playful afternoons. Just the steady ache of loss, etched deep into their bones. His father, once a man of few words, whispered of honor and survival as they moved from one makeshift refuge to another. He taught the boy how to stalk silently through forests, how to move like water so that no sentry's eye could catch his shadow. The land became their classroom, the rustle of leaves, the crack of twigs underfoot, the scent of fear heavy in the air. Yet even as death lurked around every bend, there was a spark of purpose. To protect what remained of their fragile bond, he was still young when he first glimpsed his brother's gift. The child with golden hair appeared like a phantom among the trees, a glimpse of sunlight caught in human form. His brother's laughter rang clear and pure, a stark contrast to the darkness that clung to the older boy's skin. One evening, by the pale glow of a dying campfire, his brother reached into a wound with fearless fingers and plucked a jagged piece of metal from a nearby huntsman's side. The wound knit and closed before their startled eyes as his brother's skin shimmered with an unspoken magic. It was the first flicker of something extraordinary, a power that defied explanation. The older child's heart pounded with a mix of awe and longing, for in that moment he sensed a connection, as though the same force that healed could carve its own path through his destiny. By the time he was a scarred teenager, the world had grown even more chaotic. The lush jungles and smoky villages of a distant war beckoned with promises of purpose. He watched as his brother, golden hair now flecked with dust and grime, led a ragtag squad through minefields and ambush zones. There was a fierce intensity in his brother's eyes, a hunger for justice that outshone the sun even in the darkest of nights. The boy followed at his side, clutching a rifle that felt too heavy for his slender frame. He was determined to be more than a child cloaked in shadows. He yearned to prove himself. And so, under the unforgiving heat of a foreign sun, he learned to fight. The whine of bullets, the acrid scent of spent shells, and the anguished cries of the wounded became his new lullabies. The first time his claws extended, he was crouched behind a shattered wall, each breath rattling in his chest as he tried to locate the source of the enemy's sniper. The world slowed to a glacial crawl, the crack of a distant rifle, the flash of a muzzle, the sickening thud as a comrade fell. In that suspended moment, something feral awakened within him. Bone, sharp and unyielding, burst through skin and tendon without a hint of pain. His fingertips split apart, revealing an array of gleaming claws that caught the sun's dying rays. He tore through the sniper's defenses in a blur of motion so swift that it left his own mind scrambling to keep pace. When he finally stood over the prone adversary, the body lay riddled with wounds that no ordinary soldier could inflict. The realization settled like lead in his gut. He was no longer just a boy, but something altogether different. Word of his uncanny abilities traveled fast through the ranks, like wildfire carried on the wind. A man with steely nerves and eyes colder than the steel of his own weapons sought him out, a figure cloaked in authority who spoke of duty, sacrifice, and destiny with a tone that brooked no argument. He offered the young soldier a choice, to continue as he was, a renegade among men, or to embrace his uniqueness and serve a higher purpose. The boy's brother watched the exchange with haunted eyes, tugging at his sleeve and whispering of caution, but the lure of new beginnings echoed in the forest's hush. He stepped forward, his bones humming with anticipation. As he placed his hand into that man's, he felt the warmth of possibility and the icy tendrils of fate entwined inextricably around him. In a hidden compound where sunlight never penetrated and the humming of machines filled every corridor, they began their work. Men in white coats pried into his body with clinical precision, measuring the beat of his heart, the strength of his bones, the roar of energy that coursed through his veins. He was isolated in a cell of steel and glass, allowed no comforts but the faintest whisper of fresh air. The nights were the hardest, when memories of home echoed in his mind. His father's proud smile, his brother's hopeful embrace, the soft voice of a woman he longed to protect. They probed and tested, loosening the chains of flesh until the adamantium could be grafted to bone. There was pain, a torment that felt infinite, but within it he discovered a resilience he never knew he possessed. He learned to breathe through agony, to stare down the abyss of despair and emerge on the other side, claws unsheathed and spirit unbroken. When they finally released him from that sterile prison, the world outside felt both familiar and alien. The air carried a tang of salt and oil, a reminder of time spent in trenches and ships, but also of how far he had strayed from that path. His reflection in a polished chrome surface startled him, a man with shoulders broad enough to bear the weight of endless conflict and eyes that glowed with a feral intensity. He tested the new appendages, claws of gleaming metal that gleefully obeyed his will. With each flex, they whispered a promise of power that no battlefield could withstand. Yet behind that promise lay a question that haunted his every thought. What was he now, if not the brother who once shared laughter beneath starlit skies? Amid the palpable hum of clandestine conversations, he discovered a first glimmer of connection. Her name was Kayla, and she moved with a quiet grace that contrasted sharply with the machine's cold precision. She had hair the color of moonlight caught on water and eyes that reflected a kindness he had almost forgotten existed. When she first looked at him, she saw past the metal claws and the storm that raged within. In her gaze, he glimpsed the possibility of redemption, a reason to believe that beyond the rage and the blood, something tender still flickered. He found himself seeking her out in dimly lit hallways, drawn to the way her laughter could dissolve the tension that clung to his bones like a second skin. She hinted at a world beyond the compound's walls, a place where love and laughter outshone the specter of violence. Yet even as warmth blossomed between them, shadows gathered. His brother, whose loyalty once rivaled the brightest star, had diverged onto a path paved with resentment. The world had hardened him, sharpening his gaze until it gleamed with ice. He spoke of honor with a fervor that bordered on obsession, convinced that only through ruthless measures could they carve out a place in a world that had shown them nothing but cruelty. Their conversations were tense, words laced with unspoken truths, of childhood innocence lost, of a mother's lullaby turned to ashes, of a bond stretched thin by ambition and blood. While he embraced the idea of protecting the innocent through his newfound might, his brother saw only instruments of war, tools to be wielded until all enemies lay broken. Their reunion on the battlefield was a collision of souls shaped by divergent wounds. In a village awash with the stench of napalm and desperation, they stood back to back as gunfire crackled like lightning around them. He moved with balletic precision, claws humming through the air, dispelling the enemy with brutal elegance. His brother fought with equal ferocity, each shot from his rifle a hammer striking down anyone who dared to stand in his way. But with every fallen silhouette, the distance between them grew. His brother's eyes glinted with a cold light, unmoved by pleas for mercy. The man he had once shared secrets with now seemed more phantom than flesh. When the last enemy fell, the two stood in the acrid smoke, chests heaving. Their silence screamed louder than any battle cry, and in that pregnant pause, he realized that nothing would ever be the same. It was then that the man with icy authority reappeared, offering them a place among an elite unit. A team forged in secrecy, consisting of warriors transformed by experiments as unnerving as his own. Each bore some gift or curse: a soldier who could conjure sandstorms with a flick of his wrist, a man capable of skin so reflective it could turn night into blinding day, and a hulking figure whose stride shook the earth beneath him. They called themselves Team X, bound not by blood, but by the promise of power and purpose. Their missions were perpetual dances on the razor's edge of morality, striking at drug lords, terrorists, and shadowy figures who lurked beyond honorable war. He found a sense of belonging amid these fractured souls, their scars more akin to his own than any family he had left behind. Yet, even in camaraderie, an undercurrent of unease hummed, the knowledge that they served a master whose loyalties were as fluid as mercury. One opalescent dawn, they were dispatched to an oil rig teetering on collapse. Gunfire erupted like hail upon metal as they stormed the rig's narrow corridors. In that crucible of chaos, his claws sang through steel and flesh, carving a path to the rig's heart. The roar of the ocean beneath reverberated through his bones, every step a reminder of how far he had come from chasing prairie winds as a child. When the rig's self-destruct sequence flashed red warnings, he and his team burst into the bound mastermind's control chamber. Explosions rocked the platform, spitting fire into the sky in molten arcs. They escaped as one, sailing into the darkness on a speedboat as flames devoured the rig behind them. In that moment, triumph coursed through him. They escaped as one, sailing into the darkness on a speedboat as flames devoured the rig behind them. In that moment, triumph coursed through him, but alongside it, a hollowness bloomed. Each mission left him questioning whether the ends truly justified the means. The cheers of his teammates faded beneath the deafening echoes of destruction he helped unleash. Returning to the hidden compound, he sought Kayla's gentle reassurance. In a garden lush with flora imported from distant continents, she awaited him, her arms spread like a sanctuary. She embraced him as though the horrors of war had never etched themselves into his skin, and for a fleeting moment he believed in the possibility of normalcy. But the joy of reunion was swiftly overshadowed by grim tidings. His brother had slipped away, vanishing like a ghost into the night. The memories of their last encounter in that fiery village haunted him. His brother's promise to carve a path of his own making, no matter the cost. He found Kayla's gaze filled with concern, her voice a soft anchor, urging him to lay down his arms, to let her love be stronger than the violence that threatened to consume him. Yet beneath her warmth, he felt an undertow of dread, as though fate had already begun to unravel their fragile thread of hope. Then came the night that changed everything. A convoy ambushed in the dense underbrush of a mountain pass, his team betrayed by someone they trusted. Bullets ripped through the silence, cutting their ranks to shreds. He fought like a demon unleashed, claws whistling and flesh tearing, but he could not shield everyone. A towering comrade with skin harder than granite fell at his feet, shattered by a hail of automatic fire. Another, the sand-wielder, was engulfed by his own swirling storms as an enemy detonated charges in the heart of the village below. The betrayal was orchestrated with surgical precision, every move choreographed to sow chaos. As dawn broke over the blood-soaked earth, he staggered to his feet, kneeling amid wreckage that once called itself family. The man who orchestrated the ambush emerged from the shadows, his brother, eyes shimmering with vindictive fervor. The bond they once shared lay in tatters as brothers stood divided by a chasm of fury and anguish. Yet a shred of loyalty still flickered within him. He begged his brother to remember their past, the fields of wildflowers where they had danced unburdened by blood, the lullabies their mother had sung. But his brother's face, once so filled with tenderness, had hardened into something unrecognizable, as though the man he had become possessed only the coldest vestiges of his former self. Before he could fully react, his brother raised a rifle and pulled the trigger. The crack of the shot echoed like a final verdict as the world tilted on its axis. He felt the searing agony of the bullet's impact, the hot rush of crimson staining his fingers. But even as he collapsed, he felt that familiar surge, the primal burst of bone and muscle that allowed him to endure. He crawled through smoldering wreckage to gather his wounded friend, eyes blazing with confusion and rage. When he finally stood, bloodied but unbowed, he saw his brother retreating into the morning light, leaving devastation in his wake. In the aftermath, he was carried back to the compound, where hands steadied him and voices urged him to rest. He closed his eyes, only to see his brother's silhouette fading among the pines, the echo of betrayal ringing in his ears. In his dreams, he wandered through fields of white flowers, but each petal was stained red, and every breeze carried whispers of lost innocence. Kayla lingered at his bedside, brushing stray hairs from his sweat-drenched brow, her tears etched with fear and hope. She spoke of a future beyond violence, but he could not shake the specter of that final confrontation. His loyalty to Team X wavered, his purpose fractured by the revelation that the man he once called brother had become his greatest adversary. Even as they begged him to seek vengeance, he hesitated. The compound's corridors felt suffocating, the sterile walls closing in on his wavering resolve. He found himself wandering the rooftop garden, each breath a tatters of memory. His father's lullabies, his mother's last embrace, his brother's healing touch, and finally the betrayal that severed them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky into a symphony of crimson and gold, he felt the weight of his decisions bearing down. He realized that to chase vengeance was to surrender himself to the same bitterness that consumed his brother. Yet to remain passive felt like a betrayal of the memory of the friends he had lost. Before long, the man who had first recruited him returned, bearing news that shattered any semblance of calm. There was an opportunity to erase the past entirely, to join an initiative that would give him not only the power to destroy those who wronged him but also the chance to be reborn. They spoke of a virus that could augment his abilities, of battlegrounds where he would be the ultimate weapon. They promised answers about his origins and even whispered of a code name whispered in reverent tones within the highest echelons of power. In that moment, the choice before him felt as sharp as his claws: to embrace the promise of vengeance at the cost of his remaining humanity, or to forsake retribution and live with the wound betrayal left in his soul. In the stillness of his heart, a single truth echoed: no matter how far he fled or how fiercely he fought, he could not outrun the boy who once held his brother's hand beneath the stars. He was destined to face the darkness that awaited, but first, he had to decide what kind of man he would become. The moon rose, silver and imperious, bathing the world in gentle light. As its glow washed over his extended claws, he closed his eyes and let the silence carry him toward a choice that would shape the rest of his life. The night air was thick with possibility, each breath a question. He felt the pull of every path laid before him. Vengeance, redemption, or something more elusive, a place where he might carve out his own truth. And as he stood there, adorned in the echoes of his past and the hum of his new abilities, he took a final, quiet breath. The world held its breath with him, waiting for the moment when the first steps of his journey would propel him into the unknown, into the rumbling heart of a destiny that would test every fiber of his being. In that hush, he knew that what came next would define not just who he was, but what he stood for. And with resolve steelier than any metal grafted to his bones, he prepared to step through the threshold into a future rife with peril and possibility alike. The forest echoed with Logan's ragged breaths as he stumbled through the shadows, the burdens of betrayal and loss twisting through him like barbed wire. The moon, a pale sentinel in the night sky, cast slivers of silver light that danced across the gnarled roots and fallen leaves. His senses, heightened beyond mortal ken, burned with the taste of fear and memory. He recalled the sterile hum of Stryker's laboratory, the shock of metal binding to bone, and the twisted triumph in a scientist's cold smile. Each heartbeat rang with the weight of sins he could not forget, yet beneath the stars he found a shard of purpose, a spark of defiance flaring against the chill. Gambit met Logan in a forsaken mill on the outskirts of a rusting town, shadows clinging to his figure like a second skin. Flickers of candlelight cast amber reflections in his eyes, illuminating the deft movements of his gloved fingers as they toyed with a deck of glowing kinetic cards. "You're a long way from Stryker's playground," Gambit murmured, voice a velvet thread laced with amusement and warning. The wooden beams overhead groaned under the weight of history, as if bearing silent witness to the conspiracies that pulsed beneath their surface. Logan's hardened gaze softened only for a moment before he spoke, voice low and steady. "I need the truth." Mistrust flickered in Gambit's eyes, but something in Logan's quiet torment shredded the thief's cynicism. Their uneasy alliance formed in a heartbeat, two souls tethered to vengeance-tinged hope. They slipped through the undergrowth toward a hidden entrance that yawned before them like the maw of some ancient beast, its jagged edges swallowing them in an oppressive hush that pressed upon their chests. The air smelled of rust and sterilized ambition, and the distant thrum of generators grew louder with each step they dared to take. Fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, casting sickly pallor over whitewashed walls streaked with shadows that resembled dried blood. Logan's claws flexed as he swiped at crates of supplies, the metal ribbons whispering in dark defiance. The first alarm shattered the hush like a detonator, and the corridor blossomed with men in sterile white suits. Their weapons rose in unison, but Logan moved as an avenging storm. Steel and flesh parted beneath his claws in a violent ballet, each strike forging a path toward the heart of Stryker's vault of nightmares. They breached the inner sanctum, where glass chambers cradled mutants like grotesque trophies, limbs twisted in eternal agony, faces frozen in silent screams preserved in amber fluid. The pallid glow of cryogenic lights illuminated rows of suspended horror, an unspoken testament to Stryker's godlike hubris. Logan's jaw tightened as he advanced, heart hammering with righteous fury and sorrow. At the chamber's center, a flickering hologram projected Stryker's twisted visage, his lips curled into a smug sneer as he taunted the fallen mutants below. Two doors slammed shut, locking them in a cathedral of steel. On one side lay Professor Xavier, strapped to a gleaming table, his body still and fragile, a single silver capsule perched ominously by his chest. A premonition of doom coiled in Logan's chest like a viper. Beyond the shattered pen of adrenaline, Logan's world convulsed as Victor Creed descended like a crimson tempest. The twin legacy of their lineage twisted in Victor's malicious grin, and Logan saw his own pain mirrored in his brother's eyes. Victor's claws, identical in form yet painted with divergent intent, gleamed with maniacal anticipation as he cleaved through the first wave of guards with savage delight. His laughter echoed through the corridors, a visceral soundtrack to the symphony of gore he orchestrated. For a moment, Logan's vision narrowed to the curve of Victor's blade, the sick sense of familiarity warping his adrenaline-fueled purpose. In Victor's madness, Logan recognized the reflection of all he had become, an animal suspended between the need for retribution and the fragments of humanity he refused to surrender. Their battle tore through corridors lined with equipment that had known only suffering and silence. Monitors that once displayed vital signs now flickered with static, cables snapped like strangled serpents under the weight of their clash. Logan faltered as Victor's claws raked across his ribs, searing through flesh and muscle with merciless precision. Each cut sang a lament for the innocence they had traded for survival and dominance. But inside Logan's chest, a sacred warmth ignited, Xavier's telepathic whisper, a tether to sanity he clung to in the maelstrom. He drew Victor into a chamber where amber canisters pulsed with the twisted essences of abducted mutants, their forms suspended in languid agony. Flecks of light danced on the broken glass as they circled like wolves sizing each other up for the kill. There was no victory in Victor's death, only an aching void that thundered through Logan's chest like a funeral dirge. When Victor collapsed, the world seemed to inhale its breath and hold it, the sterile corridor becoming a mausoleum for hopes and heartbreak. In his brother's final, flickering gaze, Logan glimpsed the shadow of the boy they had once been, a memory suspended in the amber of regret. The metallic scent of blood hung heavy in the still air, as Logan's claws retracted, leaving trails of rust and red upon the floor. His heart roaring in his ears, he realized that blood had stained his hands once more, yet the stain of brotherhood felt deeper than vengeance ever could. At the core of the labyrinth, Weapon 11 stirred, a grotesque fusion of Wolverine's rage and Deadpool's deranged artistry. Metallic sinew writhed beneath pale flesh as the hybrid emerged from its amber sarcophagus, its footsteps echoing like the march of an unholy colossus. Wires dangled from its spine like grotesque vines, and its masked countenance bore the scars of countless genetic perversions. Logan's breath hitched at the sight. This abomination was his likeness warped into a monstrous reflection. Stryker's serpent's hiss echoed through the chamber as he ordered Weapon 11 to finish the job. For a heartbeat, the creature hesitated, its fragmented memories flickering like fractured glass, hinting at the humanity entombed beneath its circuitry. Stryker, perched behind a reinforced viewport, raised an adamantium bullet with an arrogance that dripped like venom. He aimed at Xavier's chest, a deliberate act to sever the psychic anchor that had guided Logan through darkness. The projectile struck true, and a ripple of agony spread through the facility like a shockwave. Xavier convulsed under restraints, his telepathy dimming as life flickered out of him. A psychic scream rent through Logan's mind, shattering the veil of focus he had clung to. Pain, both physical and spiritual, ripped through him, but his healing factor surged, knitting flesh over steel in defiance of nature's cruelty. With a roar that seemed to tear him asunder, Logan hurled himself forward, claws erupting from his palms in molten resolve. He lunged at Weapon 11, raking through its armor in a blaze of red and fury until the hybrid collapsed in a hissing tangle of shattered metal and torn flesh. Fueling on a rage born of grief and betrayal, Logan pivoted on charred heel and fixed his gaze on Stryker. The scientist's smug confidence wavered, his lips curving into a faltering sneer as Logan stalked toward him, every step a heartbeat in the dirge of vengeance. Stryker's features contorted when Logan's claws tore through the viewport steel, turning glass into a rain of shards. In a moment of crystallized violence, Logan's blade sliced into Stryker's flesh, carving a crimson path across his lab coat. The scientist's scream reverberated through the ruined chamber like a dying satellite, and Logan's fury found its final note as he ended Stryker's reign of cruelty in a flurry of steel and bone. Around them, the facility's vents groaned as systems failed, a final dirge for the atrocities born within these walls. In the aftermath, Logan knelt amidst the smoldering wreckage, the acrid scent of burning ozone and blood mingling with the cold night air that filtered through shattered ceilings. Around them, the facility's vents groaned as systems failed, a final dirge for the atrocities born within these walls. In the aftermath, Logan knelt amidst the smoldering wreckage, the acrid scent of burning ozone and blood mingling with the cold night air that filtered through shattered ceilings. They stumbled into the twilight-painted forest beyond the lab's collapsed skeleton, flames licking the edges of charred machinery like a dying fire. The acrid scent of burning plastic and ozone hung in the air, mingling with pine and earth as though the world itself mourned the carnage it had witnessed. Logan knelt on scorched grass and cradled Xavier's limp form, his mentor's once vibrant eyes now dulled to a peaceful stillness. The man who had spoken of hope and compassion lay broken, his wheelchair abandoned as a vessel emptied of purpose. Logan's hands trembled as he felt Xavier's final pulse fade beneath his fingertips. Tears carved tracks down his furrowed cheeks, each one a testament to a bond forged in sacrifice and shattered in cruelty. Over the next days, Logan carried Xavier's body through the forest's silent cathedral, each step marked by the whisper of wind through pine needles. Sunlight filtered in golden slats through towering trees, illuminating motes of dust that danced like lost spirits in the hush. He found a clearing where a river's gentle song met ancient granite monoliths, their surfaces worn smooth by time's passage. There, he laid Xavier gently on a bed of emerald moss, arranging simple stones in a rough circle that echoed the rhythms of life and death. Logan worked in silence, each handful of dirt a prayer for the man who had saved his soul more times than Logan could count. Night fell like a velvet curtain dotted with stars that glimmered like distant memories in the sky. Logan crossed the threshold of a humble cabin nestled by a silent lake, its chimney exhaling a thin wisp of smoke into the crisp air. The scent of pine and age greeted him like an old friend, stirring an unfamiliar sensation, an echo of belonging he had long believed impossible. He stoked the hearth's embers, each spark dancing like an ember in his heart, and laid his weapons carefully by the hearth, as if setting down a lifetime of bloodshed. A blood-stained photograph of himself and Victor lay on the mantel, its edges curled with time. His amber eyes softened as he recalled laughter untainted by vengeance, dreams unscarred by betrayal. Outside, the wilderness whispered lullabies of solitude and renewal, a stark contrast to the world he had known. He remained in that cabin for countless dawns and dusks, each sunrise unraveling into shades of hope he had not known since Xavier's final breath. He rose with the first light, tending to the land with methodical care, gathering fallen branches for firewood, repairing the cabin's weathered roof, and foraging for berries that dotted the forest floor like scattered gems. One morning, he vented his frustration on the lake's mirrored surface, hurling jagged stones across its glassy expanse until ripples echoed against the shore. In those ripples, he saw the reflection of a man torn between monstrous instincts and the fragile longing for peace. And so Logan's story continued beyond the scars and the roar of gunfire, a tale writ not only in blood but in the resilience of a soul that refused to yield. In that cabin by the lake, he learned that solitude could cradle him as tenderly as Xavier once had in life. Each morning, he forged himself anew under an indifferent sky, not as a weapon forged by cruelty, but as a solitary witness to the fragile beauty of a world that still remembered how to breathe. The forest did not demand heroism or vengeance. It asked only that he live, breathe, and remember. In that promise, Logan found a sliver of peace, a tenuous shard against the darkness that had once consumed him. And in the stillness of dawn, Logan knew his journey was only truly just beginning. Logan's broad shoulders bore the weight of a history not his own, a tapestry of pain and purpose woven together by the relentless ticking of time. Beneath a sky streaked with dawn's first light, his silhouette emerged from the dense pines like a wraith born of shadow and steel. Each step he took stirred the forest floor, scattering droplets of dew that glimmered like fractured stars. His senses, coiled like a spring, absorbed every whisper of wind, every rustle of unseen creatures, yet his heart moved to rhythms older than memory. The scars etched into his flesh sang with secrets, the metallic agony of claws ripping from flesh, the cold comfort of steel fused to bone, and the quiet pulse of something that dared to be called hope in the hush of solitude. His mind drifted back to the cramped confines of the Weapon X program, where he had been stripped of his name and given a legacy written in adamantium and sorrow. Each syllable of thought carried the metallic sting of loss, the ghost of his mother's lullaby cut short, the laughter of a brother who had become both savior and nightmare. Logan's claws, a cruel gift from science and obsession, had been forged not only of metal but of the tortured hope that he might find redemption in a world that demanded his destruction. The laboratory's fluorescent lights, harsh and unyielding, had illuminated his transformation, illuminating bones turned to unbreakable steel even as they illuminated the fracture of his soul. Across the shadows, Victor Creed moved with predatory grace, his every breath a low rumble that stirred dead leaves into swirling eddies. He was a storm contained within flesh and bone, limbs rippled with power, eyes alight with feral joy that danced like embers in the night. In his laughter lay the promise of chaos, and within that chaos, an unholy bond tied him to Logan, two strands of the same bloodline twisted by fate's cruel design. Where Logan recoiled from the darkness, Victor embraced it, sculpting havoc like an artist painting on flesh. He reveled in the simple poetry of violence, believing that strength alone defined worth, and in his venomous creed, he saw Logan as both brother and adversary. When Victor's claws laced the air, Logan felt a tremor of grief ripple through him, as though every brutal strike echoed the memory of key moments lost to the passage of time. Yet even Victor's predatory hunger paled next to the specter of William Stryker, whose will reigned supreme behind a facade of clinical precision. In the cool sterility of his office, Stryker's eyes glinted with the fervor of a zealot convinced that genetics held dominion over morality. Each calculated word drifted through the room like a venomous whisper, and Logan tasted its toxicity on his tongue. Stryker had cradled mutants like clay figurines, molding them into weapons by day and disposing of them like broken tools by night. He saw Logan's healing factor as a commodity, a path to creating an unbreakable soldier unbound by pain or hesitation. When Stryker's fingertips brushed the icy steel of his console, Logan felt the chill of impending doom slither through his veins. In the sanctum of Xavier's school, sunlight streamed through stained-glass windows that shimmered with the hues of distant rainbows, casting gentle patterns on hardwood floors worn smooth by countless footsteps. Here, Logan encountered a different kind of challenge, one that required not brute force but the willingness to unearth truths buried beneath layers of anger. Xavier's voice, a gentle tide washing against jagged shores, whispered of acceptance and hope, urging Logan to set aside the claws sharpened by vengeance. In that garden of broken dreams, Logan discovered that mercy could be as sharp as steel when wielded with conviction. Gambit, with his magnetic smile and roguish confidence, offered Logan a mirror that reflected the power of choice. Remy's cards, edged with lethal energy, symbolized not only his gift but the power within each person to shape destiny. He could have shattered Xavier's dream for the price of power, but instead he chose to stand alongside Logan, forging a friendship bound by trust and tempered by mutual respect. In Remy's laughter, Logan heard echoes of a life untethered from the chains of vengeance, a melody that wove through his consciousness like a promise of dawn after the darkest night. Wade Wilson's manic laughter echoed through memory as a reminder that healing alone did not equate to humanity. Even as Weapon 11 lurched forth, an embodiment of tortured power, Wade's indomitable spirit flickered in the periphery like a candle in a gale. In his final moments, torn between the chaotic rebirth granted by Stryker's splicing and the humanity buried beneath madness, Wade's eyes shone with a question Logan could not answer. Had he sacrificed his soul for the sake of power, or was there yet a fragment of grace hidden beneath the shards of his broken psyche? Through each confrontation, each clash of claws and conviction, Logan felt the weight of choices pressing into his bones. The violent ballet that ensued was more than a test of strength. It was an arena where each character's essence was laid bare in strokes of blood and sacrifice. In Victor's death throes, Logan saw the hollow triumph of vengeance, a victory that tasted of ash and regret. In Stryker's final gasp, a shred of fear flickered across cold eyes, revealing that even monsters tremored when met with unwavering resolve. Remy's unwavering loyalty shone like a beacon, illuminating the fragile interplay between light and shadow. And Xavier's sacrifice lingered like a tender refrain, a reminder that hope could bloom even amidst the charnel fields of despair. Yet amidst the carnage, a whisper of hope persisted, a fragile refrain that echoed through the forest long after the battle's din had faded. Xavier's dream lived on in the hearts of those who survived. Remy's laughter, tinged with gratitude rather than sorrow, Logan's resolve to bear the weight of his past without surrendering to its darkness, even Wade's fractured soul, resonating with the knowledge that redemption might yet be snatched from the jaws of madness. Each character, in their triumphs and tragedies, etched a verse in the epic of survival, a testament to the enduring power of choice and the fragile beauty that flickers in moments of courage. And so, as Logan stood upon a ridge overlooking a world painted in the hues of twilight, each face he had known flickered across his memory like spectral echoes. In their reflections, he saw pieces of himself, the savage warrior shaped by loss, the haunted brother bound by blood, the soldier twisted by ambition, the professor's pupil yearning for peace, and the children who danced through days unburdened by the cruelty of fate. In that moment, Logan understood that identity was not forged in moments of suffering alone, but in the choices that followed, the decision to rise, to fight, and to dream even when tomorrow seemed as distant as the moon's pale glow. His journey continues, a testament to resilience and the enduring choice, lit by the flicker of tomorrow, where each dawn brings new battles and hope persists. Beneath the relentless gaze of early morning lights, the crew of X-Men Origins, Wolverine gathered like pilgrims at the threshold of a new and uncertain journey. Long before the roar of domestic audiences would greet the film, the production had already encountered its own peculiar symphony of oddities. In those first days of filming, in a secluded stretch of New Zealand's lush wilderness, the actors and stunt teams discovered that the local wildlife was as unpredictable as the mutants they sought to bring to life. Morning mist clung to branches as peregrine falcons wheeled overhead, and one crew member, tasked with carrying a prop crate to the base camp, stumbled backward into a tangle of brambles when a curious possum scurried unexpectedly across his path. The forest felt alive with intention, as if it watched the filmmaker's every move with curious eyes. Yet despite the whisper of nature's mysteries, the team pressed on, forging ahead into the realm where science fiction and reality collided. Further away from the wild thickets of New Zealand, in the sterile chill of the Vancouver soundstage, Hugh Jackman arrived each day encased in a suit of steel that seemed both wondrous and imperious. The adamantium claws, meant to glint like phantom promises of retribution, were crafted in 3 different gauges, flexible enough to be wielded by the deft hands of a stuntman, but imposing enough to appear deadly in Jackman's grip. Yet the claws had an unpredictable quirk. Sometimes, when Jackman swung at a prop set wall, or even at the donut someone left on a table, the metallic sheen would peel away in tiny flecks, sending shards of silver across the stage floor like confetti. Crew members called it the adamantium flake effect, and one day the director ordered a full halt to filming until the claws could be reforged with a sturdier alloy. By the time the props master completed the final pair, Jackman's claws had developed a reputation not just as weapons but as mischievous tricksters, whispering of artistry and imperfection. Among these mechanical marvels, the film's director, Gavin, navigated a labyrinth of shifting expectations and mysterious constraints. Word on the set was that some of the highest echelon of the studio executives had insisted on keeping a particular mutant's identity a closely guarded secret. This meant that on any given day, a labeled crate would stand in for characters like Deadpool or Gambit, the labels blurred into abstraction until a moment when the live-action reveal could carry maximum shock. Actors themselves received scripts with pages biennially redacted, lines scratched out with thick black ink, until the very words their characters spoke remained uncertain until the last minute. One Saturday afternoon, Ryan Reynolds discovered that his character was not just a mercenary with a penchant for wisecracks but something far more peculiar. The early embryonic form of Deadpool, wired to Wolverine's DNA. When he voiced his surprise, a makeup artist simply winked and said, "Welcome to our world of secret entrances." In contrast, Charles Xavier's presence shimmered with quiet luminosity, a lighthouse of compassion in the tempest of Logan's anguish. Logan first encountered the professor seated in a sunlit garden bathed in the soft glow of afternoon, where butterflies danced like whispered prayers. Xavier's voice, gentle and unwavering, spoke not of duty but of possibility, urging Logan to see beyond the razor's edge of his rage. Within Xavier's telepathic embrace, Logan felt a peace that chilled him as much as it warmed him, a silent symphony of understanding that filtered through the bones of his sorrow. In those moments, Xavier became more than mentor. He became the mirror that reflected the fragments of humanity Logan feared lost forever. In halls where destiny rippled like heat over asphalt, Remy LeBeau floated in with the flamboyance of a storm. A pharaoh's grin, a deck of cards trembling with kinetic promise, and a voice as smooth as river stones. Gambit's accent curled around each syllable, weaving Cajun warmth with concealed danger. Beneath his roguish bravado, however, lay a soul tethered to honor, a man who wrestled with his own shadows. Remy's eyes, like burnished amber, held both mirth and melancholy, for he had seen his share of loss. He moved through Logan's world like a flicker of sunlight between jagged rocks, offering glimpses of hope in the form of sly smiles and warm companionship. When he placed a single card in Logan's palm, its kinetic glow mirrored the spark of choice, reminding Logan that destiny could be reshaped by the courage to seize it. Amid their tangled destinies lurked Wade Wilson, a man whose grin stretched wider than reason and whose laughter spilled like liquid mercury. His face, half concealed beneath a mask of madness, bore the scars of a life wreathed in both suffering and slapstick fury. Wade's mutation was a curse wrapped in irony, an unbreakable healing factor shackled to an irrepressible insanity. In his world, pain was a punchline and death a revolving door, and yet beneath the snickers and sardonic quips lay a fractured humanity desperate for connection. When Wade's laughter rattled against Logan's guarded silence, it sounded like shattering glass, brilliant and broken. In those moments, Logan recognized that madness did not always soften the edges of truth. Sometimes it sharpened them into a blade that cut through pretense. But even as these souls collided within the crucible of conflict, a singular enigma loomed. Victor Creed's feral hunger clashing with Logan's reluctant honor, Stryker's clinical ambition charting a course through bodies and minds like a surgeon's scalpel, and Xavier's dream of a world sculpted by understanding and not fear. Each character bore within them the ceaseless struggle of nature versus nurture, a prism through which the tale refracted into shards of truth that stung like fragments of glass against exposed flesh. Their motives intertwined and diverged, threading a tapestry of choices that sang with tension and possibility. Within Logan's silent reverie, his claws retracted within his flesh, a gesture of restraint born of a longing for a different path. He remembered the moment he stood before a river of shattered glass in Stryker's lab, the light fracturing into spectral rainbows that painted his adamantium skeleton in ethereal hues. Those shards of color danced around him like ghosts of possibilities, whispering of a self unbound by fury. Yet when Stryker's cold gaze bore into him, Logan knew the truth. Steel might bind bone, but it could not bind spirit. The memory of that fractured reflection fueled his determination to claw his way beyond the roles imposed upon him. In Victor's presence, Logan felt each heartbeat reverberate like a drumroll of war. Victor's grin, stretched to the edges of madness, revealed teeth sharpened by instinct rather than refinement. He moved through life as though it were a battlefield sculpted for his pleasure, and Logan saw in his brother the fate he might have embraced if sorrow had not softened his resolve. Victor's eyes gleamed with the promise of blood, yet within their depths lay the twisted reflection of a child who once danced in sunlight before the world's cruelty had seared compassion from his veins. When Victor's laughter rang through the corridors of Logan's mind, it sounded like an echo from a life both lost and unforgotten. Stryker's machinations unfurled like a spider's web, each calculated move designed to entangle hope and drag it into the abyss. His voice dripped with false empathy when he spoke of weaponizing mutants for a greater good, yet his hands bore the soil of countless graves he had dug with clinical indifference. He saw Wolverine's healing factor as a formula, a means to craft the perfect soldier immune to pain and fear. In Stryker's eyes, Logan was not a man but a blueprint, a canvas upon which cruelty and ambition could be painted in strokes of flesh and bone. When Stryker's finger hovered above the trigger that threatened Xavier's life, Logan felt the full weight of his own impotence in that moment, a helplessness that fueled his resolve to shatter every chain. Yet in the midst of these secrets, the film's technical crew battled a crescendo of weather anomalies that no one had anticipated. Filming the chase through the winding streets of Mugello, Italy, transformed to stand in for the American South, should have been a triumph of location scouting. Instead, a freak deluge arrived one dawn, drenching the cobblestones in torrents that turned the parcel of Tuscany into a slip of ice underfoot. The camera dolly telescoped forward, crashing through a wall of merchandise stands as vendors scrambled to protect their wares. Leather boots, colorful scarves, and delicate pastries that splattered like grotesque fruit confetti. One cinematographer, perched precariously on the rig, clutched his camera for dear life as a sudden gust of wind spilled a wave of rain across the lens, and thanks to an errant squirrel darting across the scene, captured footage of what looked suspiciously like a mutant raccoon gloating in triumph. The director later joked during a press interview that nature cast its own cameo in Mugello, but that didn't comfort the 3 stunt performers who slid ignominiously into a fountain when the slick cobblestones betrayed them. As winter's breath crept into British Columbia's mountain ranges, the actors and stand-ins discovered that Jackman's famous physiology held a hidden virtue. Following a grueling fight sequence in which his body took punishing takes and bruises as though he were made of granite, fans of practical effects revealed a marvel. Logan's healing factor was not just cinematic. On one occasion, Jackman accidentally sliced his hand on the edge of a prop, leaving a shallow gash that bled freely onto his leather pant leg. Within minutes, after a few moments off camera, the bleeding slowed and ceased entirely, leaving only a faint pink mark that vanished by the time he returned to the stage. Eager to replicate the magic, the makeup department attempted to mimic the effect on other cast members, only to discover that their skin refused to knit itself together as Wolverine's did. The incident became legendary on the lot, with extras speculating that Jackman must carry a vial of Wolverine's DNA in his pocket, an accusation he vehemently denied, though he confessed later that he had begun to wonder himself. Within the confines of a cavernous warehouse repurposed as an underground lab, the prop masters labored to create an array of devices that would lend gravitas to William Stryker's clinical cruelty. Rows of glass tanks filled with an amber fluid were assembled to suspend mutants in states between life and possible erasure. The original designs called for a viscous gel that would create the illusion of perpetual motion, but budget constraints forced the team to improvise. They settled on a mixture of glycerin, water, and a commercial dye that lent the fluid a suspiciously sweet aroma, which prompted makeup artists to scold the crew daily. "Stop tasting your work." Nonetheless, when the tanks first flickered to life under cold fluorescent lights, the reflections danced in such a way that it seemed as though the mutants inside might still be fighting to break free. Some cast members whispered that actual experimental notes from real laboratories had been scanned and used for the background prop files, though those rumors were never confirmed. In the depths of night, when the set fell silent save for the clink of metal and the soft hum of distant machinery, Jackman often retreated to a private corner where he could sharpen his claws for real. He claimed that the hollow leisure of being fully Wolverine, untroubled by safety concerns or script constraints, helped him feel connected to the character. He'd hunch beside a small workbench, the stainless steel blades whispering on whetstones until their edges gleamed like the promise of blood. Crew members learned not to disturb him in that ritual state, and once, while he sharpened without warning, a stray spark landed on a pile of back issues of X-Men comics, igniting a small fire that smoldered beneath a stack of pages for nearly an hour before a vigilant gaffer noticed the haze. That fire later overshadowed an already tense day of reshoots, and from that moment on, the production mandated that all blade sharpening occur in a separate room designated solely as Wolverine's Forge. While Jackman honed his claws, Reynolds continued to endure the frustration of an unfinished script. He existed on the cusp of revelation, piecing together clues from whispered conversations and cassettes shipped overnight by script supervisors cloaked in secrecy. In one notorious incident, he found a note taped to his door, "This is why I'm here." It contained only a single line, "Tell him to go to the lake." Puzzled, Reynolds grabbed his bag and traveled at dawn to a nearby reservoir. There he discovered a small, weathered sign with the words "Lake Catherine" painted in fading blue letters. At the water's edge, a crew assistant delivered the missing pages of the next act in a sealed manila envelope. As the sun rose across the rippling surface, Reynolds read his new scenes, lines that would later reveal Deadpool's embryonic code grafted into Wolverine's essence. When he returned to set, he carried the envelope like a relic, convinced that the lake itself had bestowed prophetic insight into his role. Among the most whispered lore from the set was an encounter with a local Maori elder whose presence transcended mere cultural exchange. The production had contracted indigenous guides to navigate remote regions and secure permission for filming. One evening, the elder gathered the cast and crew around a fire that crackled like a heartbeat in the stillness. Without fanfare, he spoke of the spirit of the land, of creatures and beings born from the earth's bones. He cautioned that tampering with the natural world could awaken dormant forces, an ominous warning delivered over the scent of burning manuka wood. Initially, the crew thought it theatrical flourish, part of a goodwill gesture to honor local tradition, but within hours, a freak windstorm blew through the set, ripping down temporary lighting rigs and sending metal gimbals spinning into the undergrowth. When the cameras roared back to life, there stood the elder, silent as a shadow on the horizon, as though he had conjured the gale with a whispered prayer. As the storm raged, the wardrobe department struggled with Rogue's leather costume, stitched so tightly that Anna Paquin could barely breathe. The design was meant to evoke a blend of Gothic rebellion and Southern belle heritage, but the leather did not yield to the unpredictable curves of her form. Costume fittings began in the morning and stretched into the evening, each stitch tightening like a noose around Paquin's torso. During one frenetic session, the zipper jammed with a definitive pop that sounded like a gunshot. When the designer yanked it free, the zipper's teeth clinked and scattered across the floor like metallic breadcrumbs, leaving Rogue's jacket half-floating in sympathetic agony. The seamstress, red-faced and apologetic, returned from the fabric vault with an emergency patch job, a zipper borrowed from an old World War II pilot jacket. The resulting fusion of eras lent Rogue's final look an unintentional patina of antique charm. Meanwhile, in an office lined with monitors and dispatch consoles, the visual effects team discovered that simulating Wolverine's healing factor was more elusive than capturing actual healing. During one frenetic session, the zipper jammed with a definitive pop that sounded like a gunshot. When the designer yanked it free, the zipper's teeth clinked and scattered across the floor like metallic breadcrumbs, leaving Rogue's jacket half-floating in sympathetic agony. The seamstress, red-faced and apologetic, returned from the fabric vault with an emergency patch job, a zipper borrowed from an old World War II pilot jacket. The resulting fusion of eras lent Rogue's final look an unintentional patina of antique charm. Meanwhile, in an office lined with monitors and dispatch consoles, the visual effects team discovered that simulating Wolverine's healing factor was more elusive than capturing actual healing. Early test footage showed Logan's wounds closing too quickly, resembling an elastic band snapping shut rather than the cinematic slow burn the filmmakers desired. The initial CGI attempts produced something akin to a rubber mask being yanked off a face, awkward, jerky, and far from convincing. To refine the effect, they went back to basics, propping up a head cast so that liquid latex mixed with pig's blood could drip down and slowly coagulate. They filmed this in macro detail with a micron lens, then layered the footage onto Jackman's battle damage. This elaborate workaround resulted in a healing visualization that felt both visceral and organic, even though it required the unhappy sacrifice of dozens of bacon strips, which the artist called structural support, to prop up the lifelike model. Back on the rugged terrain where production had once stumbled through floods and snow, there stood a simple wooden sign marking a bridge that Logan would cross on his journey. Though the sign had once read, "Logan's Crossing," over the months of filming it had been battered by wind and downpours until the paint peeled to reveal something unexpected, a faint outline suggesting the word, "weapon." Crew members whispered that the sign itself had chosen to remember a story deeper than the one they were filming, a silent testimony to all the deleted scenes and metamorphic edits that had reshaped the narrative. Rumor held that whenever a gaffed shot threatened to reveal too much of Wolverine's past, someone would paint over the sign again, only for the wind and rain to strip away the fresh coat and restore that haunting residue. One afternoon, as spring's warmth brushed the sets with promise, a young assistant fell asleep in a storage room crowded with crates labeled for mystery props. He awoke to the soft rattle of something metallic behind him and found a single canister slightly ajar. Inside was a prototype for the adamantium bullet, the only one thought to exist. Its presence was an enigma. The prop had never been scheduled for use in that sequence, and yet there it lay, cold, silent, as if waiting for someone to remember its power. The assistant, trembling, called for help, and the seasoned prop master arrived to find the bullet resting on a bed of crumpled newspaper from months prior. When pressed about how it had arrived there, no one offered a satisfactory explanation. The bullet had never been issued for that day's shooting. It remained in the crate until the final day of actors' availability, when a faceless assistant returned it to its rightful slot behind locked doors. In the corridors where the laminates of story and reality met, Jackman discovered a small, faded diary tucked into the back of his trailer. It belonged to a previous occupant of the campsite, a hunter who had journeyed through the forest a decade earlier. The diary's pages were thin and brittle, filled with sketches of wolves and meditations on man's fragile place within nature. On one page, a crude drawing of a clawed hand was accompanied by a note, "He who wields steel must remember flesh." Jackman carried the diary to breakfast the next morning, where he read aloud the final lines, "The forest watches, and one day it will speak." Some crew members exchanged nervous glances, certain that the diary had somehow prophesied the very echoes that followed the film's completion. Over in the cutting edge, literally, of the stunt department, one of the veteran performers, known only as Crash, discovered that Wolverine's claws were not always reliable. During a rehearsal for the climactic showdown atop a tilted platform, Crash belted Jackman into place, ready to swing a retractable set of claws toward the metal surface. When Crash tested the mechanism, the claws failed to emerge, and instead, a battery pack exploded in a shower of sparks, sending Crash backwards into a pile of foam slabs. Though miraculously uninjured beyond minor burns, Crash swore off adjustable claws forever and demanded to use only the practical fixed feature claws, ones that might break under stress but would never abruptly collapse. By the time filming drew to a close, the cast and crew had become unwitting participants in an unfolding legend, one that wove together the unpredictable currents of nature, the demands of illusion, and the stubborn persistence of secrets that refused to stay buried. When the final frame was captured, the forest seemed to sigh, releasing the tension it had held for months. Equipment was packed away, and makeup trailers emptied their palettes of color and latex. But those who had been there knew that shards of the production's strangeness remained embedded in the film's celluloid like splinters of memory in the silent hours of a post-production screening room. As the projector's hum whispered against empty seats, the editors played back the film's closing moments. The final shot lingered, Logan's silhouette against a tenuous dawn, claws glinting like promises in the twilight. But behind that polished image lay the fingerprints of a production shaped by whims and wonders, each twist of fate and fragment of oddity etched into the film's very marrow. The audience would see a seamless narrative of revenge, loss, and rebirth, but the team that had birthed those images carried with them a litany of behind-the-scenes tales, of peeling claws, whispered secrets, and a forest that had refused to stay silent. And in those stories, they found a truth as strange and beautiful as any mutant's power, proof that magic thrives in the most unexpected moments. Logan settled into the dim light of the screening room, his senses alert as if bracing for a storm. The room was hushed, a cathedral of shadows where every breath seemed amplified. As the opening sequences of fire and ice flickered across the screen, a visceral symphony plunging viewers into a childhood scorched by brutality, critics were already divided. Some praised the bold exposition, seeing it as a raw tableau illustrating how trauma molds a soul, while others dismissed it as shock value that traded depth for spectacle. Yet the scene's impact was undeniable. Pain and innocence collided in a single unforgettable moment, setting the tone for an origin story that refused to flinch from its own darkness. The narrative wove through fractured memories and bloodied landscapes, merging primal instincts with the weight of familial bonds. Among these, the first hunt Logan embarked upon as a young man stood as a pivotal event. Stalking prey through a moonlit forest, he moved with feral grace until fate intervened, revealing his brother's twisted hunger in a cascade of crimson. Critics lauded this sequence for its operatic intensity, praising how Victor's grin, a predatory promise, flashed like lightning in the night. Yet others argued that the film lingered too long on violence. Critics lauded this sequence for its operatic intensity, praising how Victor's grin, a predatory promise, flashed like lightning in the night. Yet others argued that the film lingered too long on violence, questioning whether the depiction of sibling rivalry had tipped into horror rather than tragedy. Still, most agreed that the encounter crystallized the film's central conflict, the bond of blood severed by the lure of chaos. As Stryker's lab came into view, the film shifted from primal struggle to sterile horror. Fluorescent lights dripped like tears onto steel surfaces where mutants hung suspended in ambered tanks, silent testaments to science's cruel ambition. Critics compared these images to modernist nightmares, likening the composition to paintings that condemned dehumanization. The lab's halls, too narrow and too bright, evoked mock sanctuaries, places meant to save lives but dedicated to erasing them. The sound design's cold hum threaded through every frame, amplifying a sense of dread. In this clinical abyss, the audience felt themselves shrink, their empathy summoned in reverse, forced to confront the price of weaponized identity. Within this looming labyrinth, Wolverine's internal struggle pulsed like a hidden heart. When he clutched the faded photograph of James Howlett's family, critics identified a tender counterpoint to the surrounding carnage. The photograph, delicate and sepia-toned, seemed to breathe its own kind of magic, an anchor to a lost innocence. Logan's stoic mask cracked as his gaze flicked across smiling faces he could no longer reach. In that silent beat, the audience felt a collective wound open. Some critics have argued this was the film's emotional core, a testament to how a single image could fracture a hardened veneer, reminding both Logan and viewers what lay beneath the adamantium. Others felt the moment was undercut by the relentless pace that followed, questioning whether the film gave enough space for grief to truly resonate. Then came the revelation that unsettled both characters and viewers: Weapon She's Awakening. Emerging from its chamber like a grotesque butterfly, the hybrid creature oozed raw menace. Its form, an assemblage of metal and flesh, embodied critics' anxieties about unchecked scientific ambition. Some praised the sequence's choreography, limbs convulsed in a dance of demented precision, a visual allegory for mutation unbound by morality. They argued it was a bravura depiction of how science could birth abominations under the guise of progress. Others criticized it for tipping into excess, contending that the spectacle of violence overshadowed character motivation. Yet even detractors acknowledged that the scene's visceral power lingered long after its final shriek, a nightmare etched in memory. The film's climax, a torrential showdown between Logan and Victor atop a rain-swept tower, became a flashpoint for debate. Lightning fractured the sky as their claws clashed, each strike echoing like a thunderous verdict. Critics celebrated the duel's mythic quality. Two forces drawn from the same bedrock of blood, sundered by destiny, now colliding in a tempest both literal and figurative. They lauded the way the camera twisted around them, capturing not just blows but the soul of a brotherhood torn asunder. Some claimed the sequence embodied the film's thematic core, an operatic tragedy where love, betrayal, and rage coalesced in a thunderstorm. Others argued the spectacle overstayed its welcome, longing for moments of quieter revelation rather than ceaseless carnage. But nearly all agreed that the duel's visual poetry elevated it beyond mere action, transforming bones and steel into a canvas of brotherly agony. In the aftermath, as Xavier's body lay silent under sterile lights, the audience felt a collective exhale, a moment of sorrow that transcended the boundaries between fiction and life. The repeated telepathic whisper of Logan's name, faint and fuzzy in the haze of trauma, lingered longer than any spoken goodbye. Critics pointed to this sequence as evidence that the film dared to embrace true tragedy, refusing to grant a spotless redemption. Logan's stoic walk away from Xavier's final breath felt less like heroism and more like an unanswered question: what now? Some viewers found solace in the ambiguity, admiring the choice to leave a wound open rather than wrap it in neat narrative bow. Others felt cheated, yearning for a note of hope that never came. From a critical vantage point, the film's impact lay not only in these seismic events but in the conversations they sparked. Academic journals published articles dissecting the film's interrogation of violence as both curse and catalyst. One essay contended that Wolverine's arc mirrored ancient tragic heroes, those whose strength sowed seeds of their own undoing. It argued that Logan's healing factor, meant as a gift, became a curse when it emancipated him from the consequences of his actions. Another treatise examined the ethics of memory manipulation, probing how Stryker's erasure of Eileen's final moments from Logan's mind served as a climate of broader societal control. Scholars debated whether the film undermined personal agency or offered a cautionary tale about technology's capacity to rewrite identity without consent. Commercial reception revealed a parallel dialogue. Box office numbers soared, confirming that audiences craved both the visceral thrill of claws and the promise of a deeper exploration. Lines snaked around cinemas as fervent fans sought the communal catharsis of witnessing Wolverine's origin unleashed on the big screen. Yet as word of mouth spread, so did conversations about its darker undercurrents. Families debated whether to embrace the film as a mature meditation or to shield children from its unflinching gaze at loss. Merchandising soared, comic tie-ins, action figures, art books, each a testament to the film's cultural reach. But even as revenue climbed, so did murmurs that the film's brutal honesty might alienate more casual viewers seeking lighter fare thematically. The film grappled with identity as a palimpsest, layers of trauma scraping against one another until truth lay obscured beneath necessity. Critics pointed to Stryker's erasure of Eileen's final moments from Logan's mind as a metaphor for how power could rewrite pain, leaving its victims hollow. That act became a focal point for discussions about consent and autonomy, with some analysts asserting that the film used mutation as a metaphor for societal pressures dictating who one could be. Others countered that this reading overlooked the film's undercurrent of resilience, asserting that Logan's choices ultimately signified a triumph of will over design. The tension between destiny and self-determination fueled heated debates in symposiums and online forums alike. The film's emotional resonance extended beyond its central events to quieter moments of introspection. Critics highlighted the scene where Logan sat by a moonlit lake, the water's surface a mirror of his fractured psyche. In silence, he allowed himself to feel the gravity of loss, the world's muted chorus echoing around him. No dialogue intruded, only the hum of wind and water accompanied his grief. Viewers recalled that silence long after the credits rolled, speaking of its power to convey sorrow without words. Some saw in that stillness a universal meditation on grief, a space where pain could be acknowledged without spectacle. Others suggested it functioned as a necessary counterbalance to the surrounding violence. The film's emotional resonance extended beyond its central events to quieter moments of introspection. Critics highlighted the scene where Logan sat by a moonlit lake, the water's surface a mirror of his fractured psyche. In silence, he allowed himself to feel the gravity of loss, the world's muted chorus echoing around him. No dialogue intruded, only the hum of wind and water accompanied his grief. Viewers recalled that silence long after the credits rolled, speaking of its power to convey sorrow without words. Some saw in that stillness a universal meditation on grief, a space where pain could be acknowledged without spectacle. Others suggested it functioned as a necessary counterbalance to the surrounding violence, a moment to breathe before the final descent into heartbreak. Yet for all its strengths, the film's uneven tone invited criticism. Some argued that the script's multiple thematic threads, sibling rivalry, vengeance, loss, existential dread, crowded the narrative, diluting its impact. Panels at conventions echoed with debates. Was the film a tapestry of ambition, or a quilt patchworked from discarded ideas? Some felt the story's momentum faltered under the weight of its philosophical musings, contending that moments of introspection felt jarring amid scenes of unrestrained brutality. Others countered that the tension between pace and pause was precisely the point, a reflection of Logan's internal chaos, where raw emotion and feral instinct coexisted in uneasy balance. In the heart of comic book fandom, the film's divergences from source material fueled fervent discussions. Devotees argued over whether changing Victor's motivations betrayed the character's essence or offered fresh perspective. The portrayal of Deadpool within Weapon She's form ignited particular ire and fascination. Seeing the fan-favorite anti-hero subverted into a monstrous reflection unsettled some while exciting others who relished reinterpretation. Online forums buzzed with meticulous comparisons, frame by frame, debating whether the tonal shifts honored the spirit of the comics or veered into sacrilege. Cosplayers debated which scenes bore closest to the spirit of the original mythos, while fan artists reimagined climactic moments in bold, new light. Segments of the critical community also examined the film's cinematography as a silent narrator. Some lauded the shifting color palette, moving from warm, saturated flashbacks of childhood to cold, desaturated hues within Stryker's facility. This transition visually mapped Wolverine's journey from innocence to disillusionment. Use of chiaroscuro cast characters in half-light, suggesting that no figure existed wholly in darkness or light. Sound design complemented these visuals, isolating Wolverine's heartbeat in key moments to remind viewers that beneath the steel and bone, a vulnerable man remained. The heartbeat echoed like a subtextual plea, a reminder that even the most monstrous might still be human. As time passed, the film's legacy crystallized through both praise and critique. Retrospectives revisited initial reviews, many critics softening their stances as they recognized its lasting emotional imprint. Documentary features emerged, dissecting the film's production decisions, inviting commentary from cast and crew. Hugh Jackman confessed in one interview that he had felt haunted by the violence his character unleashed, questioning whether the path of vengeance truly led to redemption. The director reflected on narrative choices that had both haunted and defined him, acknowledging moments where ambition may have outpaced cohesion. Both recognized that the film's true gift lay in its willingness to leave wounds unbandaged, trusting audiences to navigate the pain. In classrooms around the world, the film became a staple case study. Professors guided students through its thematic layers, probing questions of memory, morality, and the human cost of power. Students debated whether Wolverine's healing factor was a blessing or a curse, a metaphor for resilience or an allegory for denial. They dissected the ethical implications of Stryker's manipulations, likening them to historical abuses of authority. In film history courses, it was cited as a turning point, an example of superhero cinema embracing complexity over cartoonish caricature. Younger filmmakers pointed to its daring as inspiration, a proof that mainstream blockbusters could still challenge viewers to think as well as gasp. In the years that followed, the film's echoes reverberated through unexpected channels. A support group formed online, where individuals who had endured personal tragedies found solace in Wolverine's journey. They shared how the film's unflinching portrayal of grief provided a mirror for their pain, an acknowledgement that suffering need not remain hidden. One participant recounted how the scene of Logan's silent contemplation by the lake had become a ritual of comfort, a testament to the truth that healing often required facing sorrow, not fleeing from it. Their collective stories underscored how a fictional tale of claws and carnage could illuminate real paths to resilience. Meanwhile, subsequent superhero films incorporated lessons learned from Logan's Odyssey. Directors began to embrace fractured narratives that valued emotional authenticity over unending spectacle. The post-credits discussions that sprouted in fan circles, once limited to Easter eggs, evolved into deeper analyses of thematic resonance, with Logan's story cited as an early example of risk-taking within a franchise. Screenwriters studied how the film balanced blockbuster demands with intimate character arcs, sketching new blueprints for characters whose hearts beat beneath their armor. The film's blend of raw emotion and brutal action became a touchstone, proof that even worlds of superpowers could still be grounded in humanity. Critics revisited their initial appraisals in light of these shifts. Essays pondered whether the film's tonal wavering was a flaw or part of its jagged charm, an echo of the very soul it sought to depict. The tension between visceral action and quiet lamentation became a case study in narrative daring. Some praised the film for forging a template that allowed superhero cinema to mature, while others maintained that its ambitions outpaced its coherence. Yet across these divergent views, consensus emerged on one point: the film had dared to ask hard questions. In doing so, it had revealed that beneath every blade of steel and every flash of a healing wound lay the flicker of a man yearning for purpose. In Logan's heart, he understood that the film's true strength lay not in unanimous praise but in its ability to spark reflection. Though critics continued to debate its uneven rhythm and raw intensity, the movie's events had carved themselves into the bedrock of popular culture. As he exited the theater, the world felt warmer, stitched together by dialogue sparked in shadowed rooms and whispered over flickering screens. The debates would persist, but the film's heartbeat, its unflinching honesty about trauma and redemption, always. In the soft golden haze of an autumn sunrise, the first whispers of production stirred on the outskirts of Vancouver. Crews converged like migratory birds, their breath fogging in the chill air as trucks laden with equipment rumbled along winding roads. Inside a modest trailer, director Gavin Hood and producers huddled over a table strewn with storyboards and budget sheets, imagining Stryker's labyrinthine facility rising from empty lot like a steel cathedral. Outside, carpenters and set dressers toiled, building walls that would soon echo with claws and conspiracies. Prop masters toiled in warehouses filled with crates labeled mystery props and classified equipment, their world one of measured secrecy. A crate arrived bearing stenciled letters that spelled Weapon 11 Prototype. Its heavy latch yielded to gloved hands, revealing a single hollow mock-up of the hybrid creature's sarcophagus. When the lid lifted, the air carried a faint metallic tang that tasted of dread and possibility. Its surface gleamed with faux circuitry, painted veins snaking across the sheen as if a heart still pulsed within. Each morning, a different prop assistant was entrusted with moving it under lock and key, never certain whom they could trust with the secret of a monster born from Wolverine's own bone and blood. Meanwhile, the costume department confronted its own crucible. Logan's iconic leather vest underwent countless iterations before it could slip like second skin onto Hugh Jackman's broad shoulders. The first prototype, stitched from supple cowhide, clung too loosely, billowing in every gust of wind. The second, crafted from synthetic leather to meet budget constraints, gleamed under bright lights as if drenched in sweat. Only after 3 rounds of fittings and a midnight brainstorming session over pizza did the designers settle on a bespoke blend of genuine leather and reinforced elastic, laser-etched with subtle distress marks that whispered of battles fought long before the cameras rolled. In the hush between rehearsals, stunt coordinators mapped out every skirmish and grapple. Veteran stunt performer Crash, whose nickname echoed his fearless approach, paced back and forth, memorizing every beat of the fight's choreography. He discovered early on that Wolverine's retractable claws sometimes refused to extend or snapped off in mid-swing, thanks to early prototypes made from a soft alloy. On one afternoon, Crash lunged toward a set wall only to have his retractable claws collapse inward, sending him sprawling into a foam pit cushioned by insulted coordinators hollering, "Cut!" Laughter rippled through the crew before they reset for another take, determined to tame the mischievous claws with a sturdier alloy. Training sequences pushed the cast to their limits. Jackman, already sculpted from years of embodying Logan, rose before dawn to spar with stunt doubles in a rented gym beneath flickering fluorescent lights. His personal trainer sketched routines that fused martial arts with weightlifting, believing Logan's fighting style required feral instinct and raw horsepower. One morning, Jackman slipped on a sweat-slicked mat and bruised a shoulder so badly that he silenced the set with a guttural groan. He returned hours later, cast in place, submitting to makeup's touch as they blended purple and gold into his skin like a dark art, determined to transform his pain into cinema. In a soundstage colder than memory, VFX artists hunched over monitors, eyes red-rimmed from nights spent rendering beastly transformations. They experimented with test footage of Jackman's claws, layering simulated metal over his real nails. Early attempts produced what they mockingly called the rubber hand effect, turning Logan's claws into floppy rubber appendages that snapped back under any strain. To correct this, they studied the gleam of polished steel under studio lights, adjusting light sources in software until the claws caught flecks of reflection like living metal. Each frame required hours of calibration. Instead of claws, they rendered wraith-like ribbons of silver that danced across the air. Location scouting offered tales of wonder and woe. The team ventured to the Mojave Desert to film scenes meant to evoke a brutal hunting ground where Logan and Victor first clashed. The desert stretched like a parched moan beneath a cloudless sky, its dunes shifting with heat and desire. Crews labored to build a makeshift camp, hauling water in vast tanks while contending with rattlesnakes coiled beneath scrub brush. One afternoon, an errant tumbleweed rolled into camp, scattering blueprints across sand dunes like ancient scripture. Dispatchers donned camouflage hats to chase it down, convinced the desert itself sought to sabotage their plans. Back in Vancouver, relentless rain turned part of the set into a mud pit. Cinematographers rigged giant tarps to shield cameras while lightning stitched the sky with silver threads. One night, a flash flood swept through the constructed riverbank, sending faux rocks and props spiraling downstream. Crew members waded through murky water, salvaging what they could before dawn. The production designer, rather than curse the storm, embraced it, filming a sequence of Logan emerging from the torrent, battered but unbowed. When Jackman later stepped onto dry land with soaked jeans and dripping sleeves, the director called, "That's the shot!" and everyone exhaled as though the storm had gifted them a moment of raw truth. Across the continent, composer Harry Gregson Williams wrestled with the film's emotional tapestry in a storied Los Angeles scoring stage. He sat at a grand piano beneath a cascade of microphones, searching for notes that felt like the breath of a wounded animal. On calls with Hood, he modified motifs that fluttered between hope and despair, strings that creaked like old bones, brass that roared like distant thunder. One morning, a scratch in the recording revealed an accidental scraping of a chair, but Gregson Williams wove it into the final score as a subtle pulse of tension, a heartbeat lurking beneath every crescendo. His trusty Steinway lent its ivories to Logan's lament, each key forging a mournful promise.